Good evening. We'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Operations Subcommittee for April 22nd to order. It looks like it is 5:33 p.m. And just a little reminder of the members of the subcommittee. They are myself, Mr. Devon, and Ms. Saros. So the first order of business is we're going to have a discussion of the MSBA Statement of Interest openings. Those are currently available, and we want to make sure that we get our interest into the MSBA. So, Doctor, did you want to take that?
Sure, I'll take it, and then I'll turn it over to Director of Finance and Operations, Mr. Cronin. But good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all, even though you can't see all of us yet. So for different reasons, we're in various locations. And so the MSBA has opened up their 2021 Statement of Interest process. This is the same process that we use to secure the East Middle School, the South Middle School, the two roof projects that we are in line for, in the pipeline for right now at both Highlands and Liberty. We have also put in year after year now for the high school project as a core project, which means it would be a significant either renovation or new building. We have been denied, well, we have not been invited for eligibility, I should say, for that project. I know that the MSBA just went through their eligibility invitations at their meeting in April, and I do know that there was only one high school, Agawam, I believe, invited into the eligibility phase of their process for that round of funding, the 2020 round of funding, which is partly due to the economic situation and MSBA really trying to be, I believe, and I don't want to speak for them, but cautious with the number of projects they approved, given the economic outlook or the previous economic outlook. And just a reminder that, you know, the high school projects are clearly the most expensive projects. So when they approve a high school project, they're anywhere from 300 to 200 to 500 to plus $1 million into a project that, you know, is obviously a lot more expensive than elementary schools and middle schools. But having said that, I'll let Ed talk to the process a little bit. I just wanted to get this on your radar. The timelines will come quickly for us. If you remember, we have to get approval from the school committee. We also have to get approval for submission from the town council, and they generally like to kick it to their Ways and Means subcommittee prior to that. And we would be recommending to you that we put in for a couple, we put in for additional roof projects minus Liberty and Highlands, as we have the debt exclusion monies available for supporting additional roof replacements, as well as we would recommend that we apply for and put in for the high school project again. I just think that we need to continue to do our due diligence on that on the high school, you know, regardless of where the process goes or whatever decisions get made and determined locally over the, you know, course of the next year or two. I think it would be, you know, it'd be kind of almost fiscally irresponsible for us to not put in for the high school. So those are the points of discussion. And Ed, you can talk a little bit more about just the detail of the process, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, it is sort of a evolved process. There are a lot of questions that are asked, a lot of information is requested. Certainly I want to get them in as soon as possible to get the votes of the people. And I know some of the questions have to do with budgeting for the next year. And while I can still answer for budgets for this year, I'd like to get them in as we stand currently. And I think that we can get it done fairly soon, because everything has been put in previously. So it's really going to be a question of just updating the data.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Hackett. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that update. So we'll expect to see that shortly at the full committee, or will we see it back here at Finance and Operations?
You'll see it back here. I think if you could, if you're comfortable in making a recommendation to the full school committee for Monday night coming out of this subcommittee, that you authorize the superintendent's office to begin the process of putting materials together for a statement of interest. Then that has to come back to you in the full committee for approval anyway. But at least we can have that, that kind of authorization vote so we can move forward on that process.
Excellent. Okay, I'll entertain a motion from the subcommittee.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
Aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. That's unanimous.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hackett. So the next item on the agenda is fiscal year 22 budget development, our continued discussion. And Dr. Hackett, if you want to move into the next slide.
Sure. So I think it's, go ahead. Yes, sorry, Mr. Morris.
That's all right. So I think, as Dr. Hackett was about to say, we almost said together, I think it's important just to kind of clarify where we are and then give you some updates on a few things before we jump into some updates on where we are on the budget process. So what has the school committee approved to date? The only thing we've approved is the budget number. The budget number that the town provided us with is what we've approved to date. So I know we've received quite a bit of correspondence and emails, and we appreciate all that, all the feedback. But we have not made a decision on any of the ways that we will get to the reduction. So I just want to make that clear that we're still looking at the options. It's important to understand kind of the background to how our school budget is funded. And much of that for the town of Braintree is dependent on funding from the town. There is Chapter 70 funds, as Dr. Hackett will elaborate on, but because the community of Braintree is different than some neighboring communities, the formula is different, and how much Chapter 70 money is different by community and by town. And that all depends really on the income levels and things like that. So you'll see that funding formula doesn't work equally across every city and town in Massachusetts. And that's why we're having the discussion that we're having, because the town is such a large portion of funding our budget, and the town is having a financial shortfall that directly impacts all of us, including the school budget. So, Doctor, you may want to elaborate a little bit more on Chapter 70 and sort of the reasons that Braintree doesn't get as much as other towns may.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Course. Just go to the next slide real quick. So, as you know, the state provides a significant portion of, or significance for K through 12 education through what is called, has been referred to by Mr. Course, it's a Chapter 70 aid. This pie chart represents a breakdown of the FY21. This is the current year that we're in, the breakdown of how that Chapter 78 is distributed. And as you can see, the total aid amount in the year that we're in right now is just over $9 billion with a B dollars to K through 12 schools. That includes a significant portion, obviously, for what schools receive for funding, but it also includes money for teacher pensions, and it includes money for school building authority, which is we just finished that conversation about the MSBA and the funding opportunities from the MSBA. And then also a portion to include administration grants and local aid. So the point of the complication of the formula is that you don't just take the $5.2 million and divide it by the number of school system and everybody gets an equal share, or divide it even by the number of pupils in every school system within the state, and everyone gets the same amount. The formula is based heavily on a community's ability to pay. It's based on residential property value. It's based on residential income, average income, and it is a complex formula. Every year, the calculation is done on what's called the foundation budget, which is the amount of money that every school system has to raise in order to get any Chapter 70 money. And then from there, calculations are done on how much money each school system would receive beyond that foundation budget. And that's really where we are treated differently as a community that's considered relatively wealthy. And when we think about relative wealth, we're talking about versus communities like a Holyoke, for example, where the amount of money that their budget, the amount of Chapter 70A that their budget includes is on a per pupil basis, much higher than communities like Braintree. So from the very beginning of the conversation about revenue, and we've talked about this before, we don't really benefit tremendously from additional Chapter 70 aid from the standpoint of a change in the formula. Where we do benefit is when the legislature decides to determine what the amount of money low receivers like us would receive, because what we get generally is the per pupil minimum allocation. So we would get whatever aid we were supposed to get, and in addition to that, any overage above that would be based on a per pupil calculation, anywhere from, in years past, from $20 to $30 to $40 per pupil. So if the legislature increases that minimum per pupil aid, then we will see additional funds come in over what the governor had proposed. And I believe at this point right now, the House is looking at, or the legislature is looking at, increasing that per pupil. We haven't seen really a final dollar figure. And I would just also add that the town receives also state funding too. So, and there are also charges or expenses offset to the town that can reduce the amount. So when you hear that, for example, the town's going to receive a certain amount of money in local aid, they may net out a lot lower than that. In fact, in some cases, I believe that is the case going into next year, that their net is actually less money than they currently receive in the current year, because some of the charges that go against them, from charter school reimbursements to other things that they're charged with. So, you know, the bottom line is we can't really wait for, or depend on, or think that the state Chapter 70 funding is going to be the answer to the challenge that we have in front of us. That is not likely. And we may get some help, but it certainly isn't going to be what really makes the difference in terms of addressing what we're faced with in terms of a revenue shortfall. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as a subcommittee on that. But I just wanted to, and through the chair, kind of both of us wanted to highlight that, you know, we're not really waiting for an significant influx of state funding to come our way. Now, the federal money is a different conversation, but we just kind of felt it was important to highlight this piece of it to start.
Thank you, Dr. Hackett. Any questions from the committee?
No, sir.
No, thank you for the explanation.
Okay,
So,
thank you, Doctor. If you want to go
Certainly.
back to the previous slide.
yes, please. I have someone running my slides tonight. I'm not going to tell you who it is, because we not want to embarrass any individual.
We don't want to do that.
As he or she
I'm just a
works
trainee. I'm just a trainee.
You're doing great, Jim. You're doing great.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. So to the next point, what we want to do tonight really also is talk about how we're continuing to work through the refinement and refine our proposed reductions. And to your point, Mr. Gross, earlier, you have approved as a school committee the bottom line budget. You know, I was thinking a lot about this since our last meeting, and receiving emails that we've received with feedback that I can't help but think about the word transparency, and how the word transparency is somewhat of a double-edged sword, because in the process of trying to be transparent, this budget process is truly a process, and it's like talking to someone about a piece of writing. So, you start with a draft. We put the draft out there. It's not fully formed. We're still working on it, but we want people to understand the things that we're considering and the challenges that we face as we face them. The issue is that when, there's gaps in between these meetings, or that there's a lot of work that has to go behind the scenes to really think through, make sure, double check, triple check numbers, people don't see that. So while we have continued to say this is draft, while we continue to say we're looking at all kinds of different options, we have put a couple things out there. For example, I proposal to look at some redistricting, which we knew is concerning, and one of the reasons why we wanted to put it out there was to let people know that that is on the table. But there have been no decisions made, and we know that as we go through this, things will change, and you will see some changes to even that proposal this evening as we talk this through. But that is the penalty for being transparent, is that you're going to hear ideas and issues that aren't fully formed, that aren't all the way worked out. These are not final budgets, and if it's helpful for us to do this in a public meeting. The Finance and Operations Subcommittee and the School Committee need to hold public meetings, but it's difficult for them to be part of the process when it's just, if they can't really kind of do some of their thinking out loud. And for them, because they have to have it in a public meeting, but out loud thinking is public. So it does, I just want to let people know that even what you see tonight is not fully formed. And just please continue to give us the feedback. We want that. But also please understand that, there is still time where we still have a lot that we're working on. The actual position reductions from some of the different things that we're talking about, need to happen relatively soon from the standpoint of notification. That doesn't mean that some changes might be made and some of those positions brought back either through other reductions that we make that offset it, or through federal funding that we apply. But we do have some notification requirements within the contracts that we work with our employees that we also need to make sure we meet, and also to make sure that people know what's going on, our employees know what's going on. So in case they have to prepare, to think about how they prepare themselves personally and professionally for what could be a change for them. So I just wanted to make that point. We're going to talk a little bit more about the reductions. And then, we also, in kind of light of that, also talk a little bit about, we have received notice of additional federal funding with ESSER 3. We don't know for sure when it's going to come in. So what we're hearing again from the Commissioner's office, that we can count on those funds on July 1. But, until they're in hand, we really cannot plan on them. As part of this process, we would really need to make the reductions that we need to make. And then once we are, essentially the funds are in hand, then we can talk about recovering some of those positions if that's what the committee would like to do. So with that, I'll again, happy to answer any questions around or be more clarify anything that I just said.
Well, I think just one thing to add, Dr. Hackett, and I appreciate the words. We have to be, we have to understand that, normally we're sitting here and we're looking at how to continue funding the programs year over year that we have. And when we hit a budget shortfall or a challenge like this, unfortunately, most of our, when you look at the numbers that we'll see in a few minutes, most of our budget is people, right? People, facilities, and programs. So the way that we're trying to approach this, and that's why we continue to look at every option that's available, is we're trying to find the most efficiencies that we can to get to the number that we've been given, so that we don't have an impact. And I know Dr. Hackett has said an impact on the classroom. And, I guess just to clarify what that means is we don't want to cut programs. Sometimes it's difficult in education to be completely efficient, especially in public education, because of the multitude of programs that we have to put forward. So when we talk about efficiencies, we just have to look at places that we can find savings that don't have a direct impact on the level of service that we deliver. And I know that that sounds a little different than an impact on the classroom when we talk about, having to cut positions, but we, I think we're all committed to looking at this from the standpoint of what can we do to get to this number that has the minimal impact on how we deliver education in our schools. And, you have our commitment. I know the administration is committed to that. So again, you'll see some new things this evening that you may not have seen previously. To Dr. Hackett's point, we're being transparent. We're putting everything out there on the table. We're going to just, talk through that. We'll talk through it with the full committee on Monday, and we'll continue to work over the next month to get to where we need to be. So we do appreciate everybody's feedback and everybody's patience, because this is not an easy process. So Doctor, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morrison. It is an important point because when we talk about the impact on the classroom, the significant impact on a classroom for students in the classroom is and can be, and for teachers in terms of their instruction, can be class sizes that are very difficult to manage. And, we know that as we've talked through our enrollment challenges and the distribution of our students, where they are in town and what school they go to, that the biggest challenge we face right now in terms of being able to make reductions that we would normally make is that we have sections that are we have Ross in particular, Fleury is also the case, where we have maybe 2 or 3 sections, generally 2 is where we get into it's more challenging sections of a grade level. And it just takes away the ability to take 2 sections of 14 kids and bring that down to, you can't go to 1 section of 28 or 2 sections of 15 and go to 1 section of 30. So whereas in other schools, we do have that flexibility because you're not talking about bringing class sizes to a place that become unmanageable. And that's really the protecting the classroom, is really trying to make sure that we maintain good class sizes. This slide just kind of to bring you back to where are we, and I won't go through all of it. We started with the maintenance of effort budget, and the maintenance of effort budget is the budget from which we started the reduction from. You can see that the number that the school committee voted on in the proposed budget is $71,574,118. And then that represents a $5 million reduction. We currently are carrying a revenue offset of $1.4 million, which we believe we're fairly confident we're going to be able to increase that when in combination of with potentially with some additional Chapter 70 funding, but more likely the federal funding that will become available through ESSER 3. So the number that we've been chasing in terms of actual reduction is the $3.6 million number. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one again just shows that that reduction, the overall reduction of $5 million, and we talked about that as being the actual year-over-year budget reduction. So when we look at the maintenance effort, the $76 million, the proposed budget which has been approved is 71.5. That is a $5 million reduction, or 7.10% reduction. And this slide's important only in that it shows you kind of the larger buckets of where those reductions are coming from. I can tell you already, and we didn't want to update this again, and we don't want to continue to update this slide until we know for sure where we're landing. But these numbers have already changed in terms of where those reductions are coming from. So the other point with this, just to make, again, emphasize the fact that this is a reduction to the operating budget. So the $1.4 million that we're talking about for revenue offsets is outside of this operating budget. The funds that we're using for that are one-time funds. We believe that with the federal funding, we're going to be able to continue to use federal funding over the course of the next 2 or 3 years to help kind of smooth out the reduction over time. But whatever we decide to apply for federal funding or revenue offset, those funds are outside of this. And at some point, those positions or resources or whatever they would be need to either come back into the regular operating budget, this number, or they would need to be further reduced. Next slide, please. Just wanted to, again, highlight the fact that where our leverage is in terms of making reductions and where we would make reductions in any given budget year. And I really want to emphasize that, I have a slide in here just to show that, is when we have a declining enrollment at any grade level or grade span, we have a need to take positions from that we had in place for the number that we had, the enrollment that we had, and move those or eliminate those and use those differently, because that's just generally year over year how we operate, because we don't receive tons of additional revenue year over year. We already talked about the Chapter 70 funding. The town revenue has generally been increasing favorably. We've generally been able to see and have enjoyed a 4%, 4% budget increases year over year. That's not true for us going into next year, obviously. But even when we were talking about those increases, we would still essentially eliminate positions or move those positions to other places within the budget based on our enrollment trends. So just to emphasize, you can see what's happening K through 4. You can see what's happening in grades 5 through 8. You can see both of those trend lines, and through 2019, both of those trend lines are down. So consequently, we have fewer students there. Consequently, we need fewer resources. And when I say resources, I'm not just talking about staffing. We need fewer resources at those grade levels. Next slide. So to again emphasize the point that I'm trying to make here, in any given budget year, if we weren't faced with the budget reductions we're faced with because of our revenue picture, we would absolutely be looking to make reductions in positions that were not needed in order to support reasonable class sizes or programs. So in this budget proposal, we're carrying about $1.3 million worth of reductions in positions that are the result of a decline in the middle school population of about 100 students who are transitioning now. As you saw the high school enrollment going up, those students are transitioning into the high school. And we also see the decline in the elementary enrollment. So if we weren't even talking about we're faced with a significant budget revenue shortfall, we would still be coming to you and saying to you that we have 10 to 13 positions at the middle school level that we don't have the need for based on enrollment. And we have 7 positions at the elementary level that we would not have the need for based on enrollment. Now, in better times, we'd be talking about the possibility of using those resources, that $1.3 million, to do other things, including capital, including building improvement, including even discussion of adding a program to the high school level, for example. We know that we have certain areas at the high school that we'd like to really try to improve and enhance, whether it be in kind of vocational opportunities or business opportunities, whether it be in even looking at the addition of another language at the middle and high school level. I mean, there are certainly things that have been on the table for us in terms of our longer term goals for programmatic improvements and enhancements that we have chipped away at over time, from the addition of guidance counselors to the addition of health instruction in some other areas. So that's how we'd be having a conversation about the 1.3 million. Unfortunately, we're not in that position. So, those resources in this budget proposal need to be used to reduce our overall expenditure level. So out of the $3.6 million, 1.3 of that is coming from positions that in any given budget year, we would be asking you and we would be evaluating administratively as to what we're going to do with those resources. That gets us obviously a good chunk into the overall $3.6 million reduction. when we talk about the elementary level and the whole conversation that we've had around where our students are versus where the space and the resources the teachers are, we know that we have a disproportionate distribution of our students, that we have a couple of our schools on the north end of town in Flaherty and Ross, that the enrollment's dropping there. More significantly and faster than it's dropping at Liberty School, even Morrison to a certain extent, and certainly at Highlands. So understanding that what we would be looking at in any year would be, how do we make sure that we really try to think about where our students are going? Because at some point, you know, when we're talking about Ross enrollment dropping below 200, and you look at the cost of running that building just from a brick and mortar, from an administrative standpoint, from school nursing to psychologists to different resources that we use to support our students, principal administration, at some point you have to ask the question financially, fiscally, as to whether or not you can maintain that school as a cost center. Well, the problem is we need the space. It's not that we don't need the space in the overall district. The problem is that we're not utilizing the space we have at Ross because of just where our students fall. So the only solution to that is to introduce the conversation around the redistribution of students. So right now in the proposed budget, what we're talking about, what we looked at, which is a shift from where we were the last time we discussed this, we are exploring now the redistribution of students from Morrison to Ross for next fiscal year. And I don't want to show the chart, the map again, but I think if you recall, it really is the portion up by the landing that we're talking about, which has a lot of benefits for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which includes making us more efficient in terms of transportation, but it also brings about 90 some odd students from Morrison into Ross. That shift of students will allow us to be more efficient with the use of our resources overall. It will allow us to look at additional reductions in elementary teaching positions that are commensurate with the reduction in the overall enrollment at the elementary level. So right now, we're already carrying 7 positions that are part of the enrollment decline. We're carrying that anyway. In addition to those 7 positions, with a redistribution of students from Morrison to Ross, we're looking at another anywhere from 5 to 6 elementary positions. And also that excludes any other resources that would be going into that building. So we believe it's necessary for next year. We believe that you cannot continue to operate a building that costs several hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate just to keep it open without making this kind of a shift, or something entirely different, which it would be a dramatic change to the use of the actual facility. So what we're recommending now to you is that redistribution from Morrison to Ross. And we're also recommending an expansion of flexible boundary. We already use flexible boundary right now. I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second on the next slide. But we're recommending that we expand the flexible boundary zones to include all of our elementary schools and in fact our middle schools for future years. So no students would be affected by the expansion of the flexible boundaries. The students that we're talking about right now and the families will be affected for next fiscal year are Morrison families that will be looking to move to Ross Elementary School. So does anyone have any questions on that before I kind of launch into this slide? You're muted, Mr. Course.
Questions from the committee? Sorry about that.
No, sir.
Okay, Doctor, you can continue.
I was afraid you're going to say that. I think you need to drink the water right now. So for next year, we are again looking to move about 95 students from Morrison to Ross. And I've already made the point of that first bullet that you longer term you'd have to really think about whether or not you can maintain that facility. 5 to 7 positions would result from that redistribution. And that would certainly help us to be able to better staff our buildings from a teacher ratio standpoint. Would be moving away from at Ross class sizes that are 14, 15, and it would allow us to use more of our classrooms at that building as well. So with the flexible boundary expansion, just a reminder that flexible boundaries are geographic areas where bus routes overlap to more than one school. We have been use of flexible boundaries specifically with students who were going to be Liberty students that we moved to Hollis when we were really experiencing some fairly significant crowding at Liberty Elementary School, and we had the room at Hollis to accommodate those students. Flexible boundaries are used for incoming students. In the past, we've been able to use flexible boundaries to manage our enrollment with students who are new to town, who do not have family or connections to, or brothers or sisters or siblings already in the school. They are truly families who are new to town. Whether or not that would be how flexible boundaries would always be applied moving forward is obviously not a decision that you need to make now or that needs to get made now. But what it allows us to do is to be a lot more flexible as to where our students go, so that you have kind of real-time control over your enrollment and your growth. If we had that in play right now, we might be in a different situation than we are in. Part of the reason why we haven't had that in play is because of just how our bus routes have been developed. With this move of students from Morrison to Ross, there will be certainly some changes in the bus routing. So we would be looking, again, we're thinking out loud with you, but we're looking at developing or expanding to with 5 additional zones. Ross to Flaherty, Flaherty to Ross, Hollis to Morrison, Morrison to Hollis. You can see the flow of that, including a 5th zone, which we've not done in the past. And that is, we do have several areas in town where we have both east and south buses running to those areas that we could provide some flexibility around with our middle schools. And that's just to think longer term. I don't think it's going to be needed. We're seeing students, the enrollments moving out of South right now. But as we know, we have a brand new South Middle School project coming online. And I just think it's important for this district to prepare itself and be able to have that level of flexibility over time, so that you're not into a full scale redistricting, which some school systems have to go through. You could make the argument, or I could make the argument, that the Braintree Public Schools really at the elementary level does need a full scale redistricting, and that should happen relatively soon. But I do think with the moves that we're talking about right now for 21-22, Morrison Ross, and I do think with the implementation of flexible boundaries, that might be avoidable as you go through the next several years. Any questions on that, Mr. Chair?
Any questions from the committee?
No, sir.
Okay, I just have one comment, Doctor.
Yes.
I appreciate this update. I think that, again, with the feedback we received and the concern about, making changes for families that are currently in some of the elementary schools, this certainly is a compromise, and I appreciate the work you put in to look at it. I think it's important, again, to make clear that I think the first recommendation that you're making is again, going toward the efficiency that we talked about earlier. We have an efficiency issue there that's different than, that needs to be addressed more immediately for the 21-22 school year. And I would assume that's why that is still a bullet point on the slide.
Oh,
That was
sorry,
a
I was muted.
that was a
I was
question.
muted. I was muted. Sorry about that. Yes, no, it absolutely is. Yes is the short answer to the question.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, Doctor, you can continue.
Okay, and I just, the next slide, just really kind of, you've seen this before. it just emphasizes really kind of what we're looking at. And when I look at Ross's enrollment over the last several years, at one point not too long ago, Ross was at about a little over 300, and you can see 1920 it was 239, and 2021, the current school year we're in, we're at 203. Understanding that that includes also fifth grades move to East Middle School, but the 239 includes fifth grade. And when you go back just 3 or 4 years from 1920, we were over 300 kids. So that decline has been is a trend. Whether that always continues, who knows? But to the earlier point, having flexible boundaries will allow you to make adjustments as your enrollment shifts over time. Again, it's the challenge of having neighborhood schools, but it's and I think there are a lot of reasons why neighborhood schools make sense and are great, but it does present less flexibility, and you really kind of have to build in flexibility in terms of enrollment to the best extent that you can, because you cannot project where kids are going to. You can project how many kids are going to come to town, what your growth may look like with enrollment projections, but you cannot project where they're going to land at in terms of where they live and what school they'd be going to. So this slide, again, just kind of shows that with moving about 97 students from Morrison to Ross, we would be able to essentially staff relatively the same as we currently staff at Ross. And as we look at Morrison and the impact of that move, you can see that there's clearly in the far right-hand corner, there are positions that we would be able to reduce as a result of that. So we have some other thoughts on Morrison and what we're talking about there. The challenge of this is that we will be somewhat artificially low at Morrison for next year. And that's why the implementation of the flexible boundaries, and candidly, as early as next year, flexible boundaries, looking at students who would otherwise go to Hollis to go to Morrison. I'm talking about students who would be new to town to us for next school year. I think should take effect. I think you have an opportunity to start that process now. Hollis just happens to be kind of the linchpin of all of this, because you almost have to get students into the northern part of town. You have to pull students who are the northern part of Hollis boundary into Flaherty and Ross. And then you have to bring students, so the Hollis doesn't get too small. You have to bring students from the southern part of the Hollis district who are going to Liberty and Highlands, and you have to think about bringing them into Hollis. So we do, again, we'll come back and talk a little bit about Morrison. We have some additional thoughts on what next year would look like in terms of some programs at that school. As you know, Morrison also serves as houses some district-wide special education programs as well for us. So there are students at Morrison right now who are from other schools attending Morrison specialized programming. Next slide, please. And final slide.
Doctor,
Yes,
before you move to that slide, just a quick question on the flexible boundaries that you're proposing. There's been a lot of talk at the state level about enrollment, especially pre-K and K, during the last year, that a lot of those students may have kind of dropped out of the enrollment picture. So if they did come back in the next school year, would you consider that would be part of what you would address with flexible boundaries?
It's yes. I mean, that's a possibility. We do have flexibility already with inadequate, because even as those students who may be new kindergarten students new to town, they may land at inadequate. Where they go in their first grade year would be determined by how the enrollments are looking. So having the flexible boundaries in place, to your point, it gives you some flexibility in that following year, not next year necessarily for kindergarten students. We are currently carrying, if all of our students who left us and who come back to us in grade 1, we're currently carrying the staffing that would handle all of those students. As you go into the fall, you may find that, or late summer, fall, you may find that not all those students come back, and you might make some additional adjustments to staffing as a result of that.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Any other questions before we move to the last slide?
No, sir.
Okay, hearing none.
And finally, you know, there are and have been and continue to be additional conversations that we've had internally, administratively, as we look to try to solve this challenge that's ahead of us right now. What we've shown you so far can manage, we believe, the reduction, the $3.6 million reduction that we're faced with. These are some other things that I think deserve and need some additional conversation from this committee, subcommittee. I'm certainly not thinking that you're going to have that conversation tonight, but I think that it's important for us to continue to look at potential operational savings, which are non-academic, non-classroom teacher related. Some of these are potentially possible. Some of these would be for next year. Some of them would be very difficult to attain. Some of maybe things that you never want to get to. But we know that there are things that we do to keep our schools open, from custodial to transportation to non-academic programming that we offer our students, that we already have fees set for that help as revenue offsets, and just continue to remind people that certainly athletic fees and the transportation fees do not cover the true costs and total costs of that service and those programs. But we don't want to walk away, and we would want you to tell us if there are other things that you want us to look at as we continue to move forward. And anything that can be saved here, potentially, is certainly at minimum is the conversation about whether or not there are reductions that we're talking about in the budget we presented to this point that you would want to offset and not make as a result of savings that might be found here. I can tell you that certainly from a custodial standpoint, we're not overstaffed. So when we talk about our staffing at the elementary, at all our schools with our custodians, we could, you could make the argument that in some cases we need some additional staffing. The consideration of privatization, privatization of custodial service is done elsewhere in some school systems, not too far from us. There is potential for savings there, but it would have to be certainly well thought through. We'd have to go through a process of getting an RFP from providers. We'd have to certainly go through the process of talking and working with the custodial association. There's a lot involved in that conversation, but it is, it's something that I think that needs to be, in the spirit of being transparent, we wanted to put out there for you for some direction and some feedback. Again, not necessarily this evening, but we wanted to put it out there. The other thing that we know with our transportation is, as we work through the redistribution of our students, we're going to see some efficiencies. We have already seen efficiencies with our routing software, which we've been continuing to implement in full. That software will be fully implemented and is almost fully implemented right now, but it will be certainly as we develop the routes for next year. And we already know that there's some potential for some efficiencies that we can gain just by the development of runs through that software that bring up possibilities that we might not otherwise see when we're doing it by hand. So again, we just wanted to put this out there for you, for the public, for everyone to understand that these are conversations that are happening. We are still a few weeks away from really having a final proposal for you. And we want your feedback as a subcommittee, certainly if there are things that we should be looking at that you want us to come back to you on.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions on any of this from the subcommittee?
No, sir.
No, thank you.
Okay. Doctor, I appreciate this last slide. I think, again, to your point, there are multiple avenues to get to the savings that we need to get to. And, everyone has a potential impact. And I think it's just good that we're continuing to look at what all the options are. And, when we bring it to the full committee, obviously we'll have to make a decision on, which areas we think make the most sense. So I appreciate the work that's been done. I know a lot of work has been done behind the scenes since we met. And, we'll continue to look at these and ask you questions about other things that there may be efficiencies or savings that can be had to get to the goal.
It's certainly not an easy task. It is a challenge, and you know, we are not. We have seen other school systems go through this challenge around us in prior years. We're seeing some school systems go through it now. I mean, it is just kind of part of the cycle that economically that school systems and towns go through, and unfortunately, we're not immune to it. But again, you know, our hope is that we're providing some reductions that also will have longer term savings, kind of year over year savings, so that when the revenue picture starts to look better, you know, we're in a place where we're more efficient and able to really start again having the conversations about enhancing and improving programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other thoughts or questions for Dr. Hackett?
No, sir.
Pretty straightforward. Okay, Doctor, you want to go back to our agenda?
Sure thing. I will.
Thanks. Or
This is
Mr. Lee,
also, this is a
whoever's
transparent process as well.
whoever's running the show. So,
A lot of pressure.
yeah, you're doing great, Jim. You're doing great. So next steps, we will bring this presentation to the full committee on Monday night at our meeting. And I believe we'll probably meet Doctor a week from today.
Yes, I would recommend that. Yep.
Because we're bumping up against the date that the mayor has to present to the council, right?
Correct.
So, okay. So let's assume we'll meet next Thursday at 5:30. Does that work for everyone?
Yep.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
That's the 29th, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Yes,
And-
okay.
And Mr. Course, just to that point, what you will need to do is vote the 10 articles. And
Correct.
that vote will happen likely before we finalize all this bill. And so just a reminder, everybody and to ourselves, I guess, that as you vote, take the next step, voting the articles and that budget in a level of detail going to the mayor and then to the council will still not be final. And even, that's true in any given year. It's just especially more true, obviously, because the complications we're faced with right now in FY22. But I just want to make sure that people understand that even with that next step, you're still not locked in necessarily to what the final details of FY22 will look like.
Right, right. And that's no different than previous years, so.
Correct, just a little bit more unfinished than it has been in prior years.
Right, and you know, I guess the comment to add to that, as in prior years, we always saw improvement in some of the revenue numbers that we had to estimate. So that's why, you know, that's why we get to those issues sometimes, you know, and we have to have the time to see how the revenue falls out, especially as you mentioned, the federal funding. So I think all of that has an impact on, you know, what we can finalize for the budget.
Correct, right.
Right.
Okay.
I noticed there's a couple of, I don't know if the chat is live, Dr. Hackett, but
It wasn't supposed to be, but it looks like there's a couple questions in here.
yeah, I don't know. I can't see them. I don't know if it's anything we can address this evening. We certainly will have public comment at the school committee meeting on Monday.
Right.
So I don't know if you have visibility to what's out there.
I do. I think it would probably be best not to answer them tonight, but we can. Both of those questions, I believe, would be part of a discussion we could have with the school committee on Monday night as part of this presentation.
Okay. So if those that have sent those questions in to us would be able to attend the school committee meeting at 6:30 on Monday evening, there will be public comment available at the meeting, and hopefully we can address those questions on Monday evening. with the full committee. Okay, any other questions or comments before we move to adjourn? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So moved,
moved.
sir. Second.
Okay, it sounds like a motion and a second. Roll call vote, Ms. Saros,
Aye.
Mr. Devon,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Appreciate the work and look forward to having more discussion on Monday.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.